Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for another edition of the Leadership Café, where we talk to extraordinary people leading remarkable businesses. We're your hosts. I'm Richard Citron.
Yeah, and I'm Michael Couch. And before we get too far along, we always want to make sure we thank our sponsor, Vaco. Vaco is a global talent solutions company, and we really appreciate their support for the Leadership Cafe. We couldn't do it without them. Well, so today's special guest is Sean Lydon, who is the president of an organization located down in the Washington area, ISCM Incorporated. Be interesting. It's an interesting organization, so we'll be excited to learn about that. But welcome, Sean.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the Leadership Cafe. So, yeah, maybe Sean, start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your leadership background, and also then we'll like to learn more about ISCM together as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Sure. Well, ISCM is an international trade consulting firm based here in Washington, D.C. We help companies with international supply chains get their merchandise effectively into the United States. And as you may have read in the papers, there's lots of issues with international supply chains these days. Unfortunately, I don't have any great news to share with respect to that. It's going to take a while after the pandemic for factories to rebalance. Demand has been shifted significantly based on the pandemic, not something anyone could have planned for. So there's huge capital investment in areas like semiconductors and things like that. That will be required to have to come online before we start to see any kind of normal situation with respect to that.
Yeah.
Hey, Sean, is it a supply issue, or is it are there enough supplies, or is it that there's congestion at the ports and backlogs of orders? What are you guys seeing in terms of the challenge of getting supplies around?
Well, Richard, I wish it was just one thing, because that would make the problem a whole lot easier to solve. For one thing, we had a massive shift in demand, right? So everything moving online, you don't need the same desk supplies anymore, but you need webcams and all of these kind of things, computer monitors, kids that are remote learning. All of a sudden, you saw this instant shortage of laptops. Yeah. Well, I mean, people plan those factories, right, and the chip making capacity years in advance, and it's not something you can quickly change. So there was this huge shift in demand patterns for items, which frankly we don't make here in the United States, and so it has to kind of first the consumer demand starts, and then those signals start to work back through the supply chain to say, hey, I need another wafer fab, which by the way, costs at least a couple of $1 billion these days. So that's not a fast investment. It takes a while to come online. We also did have the physical impact of the virus itself. We had dock workers on the West Coast getting COVID that reduced the capacity of the ports to bring in materials. So even after demand started to perk up, we couldn't bring it all in. And we're still working, unfortunately, through that backlog. People are nervous. The Christmas season. So for imports, guys like me, the need to bring material in peaks around August. That's when we're starting to get ready for merchandise and retail. And so if we don't clear the backlog by then, and we're already backed up and things start coming in for Christmas, it could be a difficult season. They're definitely working through it. People are starting to use East Coast ports more. Typically, again, the routes from Asia are straight to the West Coast, but folks are going through the Panama Canal trying to find other areas. So while all of that happens, but again, Panama Canal, so you just added 10 days, you know what I mean? So this dead space. So all of that reconfiguration, which the virus itself created, is going to take a little while to work through.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so any guidance so I'm assuming the supply chains are going to change as a result of this, do you think, or they just need to get back to the way they were before?
Yeah, supply chains are going to change. But Michael, we do have a significant dependence on manufacturing of components at the very least in other countries. So we talk about reshoring, which I think is a great initiative, and I hope we do bring more manufacturing back to the United States. But we have to realize that in some of those industries, we don't make any of the components either. So even if you move the major factory here, they're still going to need to get their parts in. My personal experience where Michael and I first met was at Sony Electronics, where they established a television manufacturing facility where there hadn't been any. And although the market for televisions was here, there are no components whatsoever. Almost every component of the television had to be imported because there were no suppliers left in the United States. And so when we start to reshore, they're still going to have those kinds of issues where we need to bring in parts. Of course, those industries should filter back into the United States too, but that takes years before, again, that capacity can come online. So I'm hopeful that it will, this recent experience will bring more manufacturing back to the United States, but that's still not going to be an immediate answer to the supply chain issues we're experiencing right now.
Yeah. So guidance to leaders at this stage, patience.
Definitely patience. We saw recently how housing starts are down. And of course, that to a guy like me, that makes complete sense because a sheet of plywood costs $92. There's no way folks can handle that kind of a cost increase in their cost model. So, if you're a home builder, it's good. There's really no way to get around it. It's going to be rough. But if there are different ways, if you can avoid investing in different segments of the business, which are just time sensitive right now, you may want to shift your priorities away from things, but it's hard. How do you get away from building materials? How do you get away from needing semiconductors in automobiles? Some of those are going to be tough. So there's definitely probably a reconfiguration you need to think about because this is a long-term problem, not with an immediate answer.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So when you think about, talk to us a little bit about your leadership journey, and I think you probably are bringing up all of your leadership skills to help your clients address these issues, both in terms of, evaluating, but I'm sure people are desperately calling you and saying, what's the solution for this? And it sounds like patience is one of the leadership skills, perhaps, that people have to develop. What's that trip been like for you, and what are some of the key messages that you're employing now to help your clients?
Well, Richard, in a kind of a distributed workplace, there are two things that kind of come to mind from my background. One is I remember a story when I first started working at Sony. I was a young guy, division general manager. My career's on the line all the time. It's a 24-hour manufacturing operation. Equipment goes down, people don't show up. And it was a lot of arm waving, a lot of yelling and screaming. We hired these two nuclear engineers. I wasn't that excited about nuclear engineers in my part. We didn't do anything nuclear. These guys were out of the Navy submarine program. Yeah. And, they had been specially trained and screened to live in the metal can, 300 feet below the ocean where, tempers just don't add to the solution. And so despite all of my arm waving, talking to these two guys, and I still remember them to this day, they would follow me with their eyes. They would absorb the message I was giving them, and then they just go back to their desk, make an action plan, and start working the problem right away. And so it really struck me that these guys could be so effective at exactly what they needed to do at that moment, despite the fact that I was might have been hysterical depending on what the particular problem was. And it really helped me to understand how important focus was on the message that I was giving to my people. And so maybe, the arm waving wasn't really doing what I needed to. I might have been expressing myself, but not in a helpful way to the organization. And one of the things too, as a CEO, every day he wakes up, what do I need to be doing right now? Like this very minute, that's kind of the thing you always worry. What should I be doing right now? And that focus on the things that are important to your organization. First of all, now finding out what those are, because it may have changed in the pandemic. If you've got a semiconductor shortage, right? Okay, suddenly for Ford, that's problem number one right now. So you need to be focused on that. The arm waving is not going to help. We need to be thinking about creative solutions in the pandemic. The other thing that strikes me too is that we really need to be focused on alignment. This is a big thing for me in a distributed workplace. We've got people working from home, people spread out all over the country. We've got, Zoom and Teams and all of those kind of tools to keep in touch, but we don't have them all necessarily in the same place the way we used to. And, I see these calls for companies that want to pull everybody back to the office, immediately. And I wonder, well, why do you need everybody in the same building? If they share your values, they understand the mission of the organization, why do they have to be, physically within your line of sight in order to execute the way you need them to? And so I think the pandemic has sort of highlighted the need to make sure, your management systems are in place and driving the right kind of behaviors. Honestly, I think, your phone should be ringing off the hook with people who are like, Michael, Richard, how do I motivate people even when they're not here, when I can't see them, or they might be working a different schedule, they need 3 hours in the middle of the day because, school is virtual. How do I make sure that they're still thinking the way I am and, executing to the goals of the organization? So those were the two things that I thought were really relevant to the mission today. What we see of folks struggling with is making sure we're really focused on those things that we need right now, and then aligning to the organization to those goals to make sure that even in a distributed workplace, we're executing on those goals.
Great. I had the opportunity to hear the head of research for Steelcase Furniture.
Mm-hmm.
So they study the workplace really in depth. It was very intriguing, and they just did a global survey, 30,000 organizations and the leaders. 75% of those involved in that survey said their workplace configuration is probably going to be different because they're going to go to a hybrid model. So I was thinking, well, maybe 20-25%, but 75%. So that point you're making, then the workplace, the actual facility is going to be different, but focus and alignment would be a key way to be able to work in a hybrid model. Excellent.
Well, and a case study example was I had a call from a new potential client recently, the COO of an organization, and when we chatted on Zoom, he said, I really want everybody back in the office. I just think we work better. And I said, well, we'll say more about that. What is it that you think works? So he says, well, I just really enjoy walking down the hall and stopping in people's offices and talking to them. I said, so is this about you? And he said, well, I gave him pause, and I think he came to see that it's in some ways about him, that he really likes that. Obviously, he believes it encourages collaboration, but the origin of it is he gets kind of lonely at the office and likes that distractedness. But Sean, I want to follow up on that a little bit, because his thinking was, I can align my people better if we're all in the same place. What have you seen your best customers do that in this distributed workplace they do to align their people? Because I think we hear that as a phrase. And Michael and I, in our strategy-driven leadership book, we're very focused on the behaviors. So yeah, we agree about alignment, but what do people do to bring that alignment into play? What have you seen in the best companies you've worked with and are consulting with?
Well, metrics can be great. They can be maligned. I'm an engineer by training, so of course I love numerical goals. Not everything can be numeric, and you have to be very careful about what you pick, because once you start measuring something, you're going to get it. You might lose some other things, but you're going to get that thing that you measure. So to the extent that you're able to measure the goals of the organization, maybe you don't have to put your face in their door once a day. And that's a great story, Richard. I miss that too. I miss that human interaction, but we have to be realistic. Is it going to come back? When you talk about someone like a Steelcase, the office furniture business, that's everything that they do. So now what do they do? Can they go back? probably not. And so this is kind of that transition, that organizations need to make. But I do see people talking more about metrics so that they understand how people are functioning, even when they're not necessarily in the office.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
That's a trend. That's what you mentioned is a trend, focusing on the result and not so much that you're here and you're breathing and have a pulse. I mean, but why is that? We just have to see you to make sure but no, it's focusing on results and the outcomes, not the time and effort and location of where you're working. One of our clients too, and then somebody we had on the cafe, talked about, boy, they're glad they built their culture bank over the years, and alignment and focus is part of their culture, because they said if we didn't have that, because we had to make withdrawals from our culture bank, last year, but we had enough in there that we were okay. Does that ring true with your perceptions too, Sean?
Well, I definitely see folks, and I think Richard's example was spot on, right? If you didn't have that culture bank, it's going to be a lot harder to drive now, because you're missing that human interaction part. So I don't have a great answer for, well, how do you drive that in the Zoom world? But again, focus, make sure you understand exactly what the organization needs to execute, and then you start aligning folks, and that creates a culture too. Right now, it's a new culture, it's a distributed culture, okay, but it's focused on getting the important customer-facing things executed.
Yeah, cool. Before I wrap up, I want to make sure that we, how if somebody wants to get in touch with you or learn more about ISCM, what would be the best way to do that?
Well, our website is always the best way, iscm.co. We're on the web, explains what we do. We have a monthly newsletter for folks interested in international trade doings here in Washington, D.C., and you can go to the website and sign up.
Great. Go ahead, Richard.
Sean, one of the questions we've been focused on, we've kind of finished up with a lot of folks, is that assuming you've had no great tragedy over this past year in your family or your loved ones, most people have been thinking about what 2020 and the pandemic has done to them.
Mm-hmm.
We'd kind of turn that around a little bit and asking people what this current social and business challenges have done for you. What's been the learning for you this past year?
Well, so it might not make folks that happy, but guys, in international trade, when international trade goes crazy, the phone starts ringing. So there's sort of new competencies, right, that these organizations have to get. You used to just, send a purchase order to your supplier and the stuff showed up. But now when it starts to get strained, it's stuck on a boat off the coast of LA. What do you do? So it has sort of highlighted the fact that we, import so much of our, not only finished consumer goods, but even, components for manufacturing. And so I do hope that long term it does kind of recenter the U.S., that we have to have a manufacturing core here in the United States. It might not have to be everything, but it probably needs to be a little more than we have today.
Great. Well, Sean Lydon, we want to thank you for joining us today on the Leadership Cafe. This has been a great discussion. Your tips and important points about alignment and focus are great, not just for business leaders, but really for every employee. As a thank you for joining us, of course, I have to pull my copy out here. I keep it by my side here, but it was covered by some other books. Copy of our book, Strategy Driven Leadership. We'll sign that and get that off to you. We also want to thank again Vaco for helping us make the Leadership Cafe an important place for us to visit with some of our most successful CEO leaders in our community and beyond. Great to have the DC folks here joining us. So remember that you can hear this podcast on my website, on Michael's website, as well as on LinkedIn, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast places. We release these every Thursday for publication. We also want to thank our producer director extraordinaire, Michelle Zherozowski, for providing such amazing support. Thank you, Michelle. And for all of us on the Leadership Cafe, thanks for joining in. I'm Richard Citron.
And I'm Michael Couch, and we look forward to connecting with you on the next Leadership Cafe.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you for having me.